And thank you everyone for joining us. Really looking forward to getting started. And thank you, Gillian, for making the time. We appreciate you joining us this evening, albeit virtually. But I guess such is the, I almost got away with not saying new normal, but new normal, to use the cliche. If you guys are listening in, you may want to turn to speaker view, but gallery view is also absolutely perfect. And to start things off, Gillian, I feel it's always better to get a bio or an introduction from you, if that's okay. I'm confident you'll say things much better than I possibly ever could. And then we'll start off with the first question after then.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here and delighted to join you virtually. And maybe at some point we'll be able to do it in person as well. But thanks for the invitation to join you. I'm Gillian Docherty. I am the CEO of the Data Lab. And you'll probably hear a bit more about that through the course of the discussions. And I know some of you already work with and are familiar with the Data Lab. So it's good to see you on the call too. But the Data Lab is Scotland's innovation centre for data science and AI. And our role is to help drive economic and social benefit for the country and help organisations use data to drive value. So it's a really exciting place to be. I have worked in technology for a long, long time. We'll probably cover a little bit about that background. But that's what I do now. But looking forward, I've seen some of Declan's questions, and he's promised me you all ask really tough questions at the end. So I'm looking forward to that, because then I'll feel better about opening that beer at about 8:30.
Oh, me too, Joe, and I have to say, and thank you. And it's genuinely so brilliant to have you. And I thought we'd start, if it's okay, at the beginning and even quite early on, actually, and asking you about computer science and your passion in the wider subject. And I wonder, it's always a difficult question to ask, I suppose, but was there a particular moment at school or university that really got you into computer science, or has this developed throughout your education?
Well, it's one of those weird things. I'm quite pleased, because actually when I was at school, we didn't even have computers. It was that long ago, everyone. I do use oil of Ulay, so I don't look that old, but it was a long, long time ago. In the 80s, I was in secondary school, and we had no computers till I got to 6th year, which was my final year in school. But I loved the sciences, loved physics, chemistry, maths, all those kind of things. I really enjoyed economics, actually, as well. So. We got our first batch of BBC Commodores. Looking at all of these faces, you won't even remember what that is, but they were really, really old computers back when I was in my 6th year, and I was just looking to fill the timetable up, and they were doing this. It wasn't a formal qualification, but just a certificate in computing. I thought I'll try that, and then I went to University at Glasgow, originally to do maths and economics, and I needed to pick a third subject. I thought, well, that computing was quite fun, I'll add that. And then by the end of second year, I dropped everything else and stuck with computing. So it kind of got really interesting from there. The university had Apple Macs with the floppy disk drives in the front, and they had some Sun back-end servers, thinking back. And Apple and Sun were really, really clever. They used to give universities really cheap or free equipment. So essentially all the computing students, that's what they learned. And then when they went out into jobs, guess what? That's what they bought when they get into positions where they could buy technology. And I remember when I first joined IBM, I was working on mainframes, and university, despite doing a degree in computer science, they never had mentioned the mainframe. And it was actually what every large company in the world ran on at the time. But it was all because they got free Apples and Sun computers. So if anyone's looking to sell their product, get it into the unis and get the students using it and get the postdocs using it. And they'll buy it when they get jobs.
Oh, that's a brilliant point. And that's really interesting, actually. And I guess it's a good maybe sales bit of advice. And one thing I know, I'm constantly jumping around a wee bit, but I was really keen to ask you actually about obviously starting at more of a technical role, mm-hmm. and then moving into sales relatively early on in your career. I was really keen to ask you, because I was looking in, it's quite a big shift and one that maybe most people wouldn't typically take. What was your, was there a particular moment behind it? Yeah, what was your
Yeah, it
thoughts
was
on it?
probably a bit of a journey. As I said, I started as a mainframe system programmer, and I got a job just straight out of university. They used to do this thing called the kind of graduate milk round, where companies would go around all the universities and interview talent. And I was interviewed, and they said, "Oh, you know, you're going to be getting a second interview." And at that point, and it's really sad now that it's no longer there, but IBM had a huge facility in Greenock, just to the west of Glasgow, for anyone that doesn't know it. And it's a height employed around 6,000 people, so it was huge. It was a manufacturing plant, but also a big development centre. And I thought I was going to be going to Greenock, and the second interview turned out to be in Portsmouth, which, if anyone doesn't know, is at the completely opposite end of the country, just off the Isle of Wight on the south coast. So I kind of got my map out and started looking, thought that's a long way. And it turned out that's where the job was. So I moved at the age of 20 down there with a rucksack and a suitcase, and started my journey. And as I say, was just placed into this role as a mainframe system programmer, and got involved in, after a couple of years of doing some internal work on IBM systems, got involved in some of the outsourcing clients they worked on. So at the time it was companies like Next, the retailer, General Accident, which was an insurer at the time, Royal and Sun Alliance, Equifax actually at the time outsourced to IBM. And I got to work on their systems, and then started to meet the client side. And so it was a bit of a journey from kind of very technical, inward focused, then meeting clients, and thought, actually, I really quite like that bit. And then moved into a technical role, supporting clients directly, working with salespeople. And I naively looked at the salespeople and thought, they know nothing. I know everything about the products we're selling, and they're making tons of money. So I'm going to go and do that. But I naively didn't realize all of the other complexities of being in sales, and actually a huge amount of talent that's needed, particularly working with big clients and understanding challenges and all of the things you need to do. And they were all the things that I then had to learn to make the money that the salespeople were. But what I really enjoyed was the client-facing things. So it was about understanding problems, trying to understand if what products and services we had could address those challenges, and then all of the techniques of trying to sell it and beat your competition.
That's fantastic. And one thing I was keen to ask you, actually, based on sales in such a technical field, was how did you find that shift between being so knowledgeable about the product and the technicalities versus almost translating that into sales, if that makes sense? Because one thing I hear a lot is trying to avoid jargon at all costs. It'd be great to get your thoughts on that and how you found the balance of being so knowledgeable versus being able to speak the customer's language.
Yeah, well, I guess in the technical roles, you also talk to customers, but you were generally talking to the technical resources and customers. So you would be speaking the same language, very technical, lots of, if anyone ever knows IBM, lots of acronyms, lots of the big tech vendors, product codes, your digits and 3-letter acronyms coming out your ears. And to a certain extent, the initial sales roles I had were in a very narrow set of IBM products. So it equally was quite jargony, it was in a certain suite of product sets where the clients knew a lot about our products and the competitors. So it was quite a technical sale, and it was in the hardware division. So I was talking about throughput and cache and non-volatile storage and disk speeds and all, connectivity channels and all of this stuff. It's amazing. It's all in there somewhere. It's just paged out to the back. And then over the years, as you move to more broad solution selling, where you're looking actually at holistic problem sets, you're building more complex solutions than just looking at very point product areas. You have to learn that business language. You have to understand what the client's trying to achieve, what challenges they're facing, and then you get into the architecture of much more complex solutions. So I would say probably at the start it was quite easy because it was in the product areas I was very familiar with. But I think one mistake that both I made and almost every other person that I've seen going from technical to sales is they think they can also retain all the technical knowledge. So I remember building configurations and doing all that, and within 6 months my knowledge was out of date in the product. But I still thought I could do it, and I made some mistakes, costly mistakes, when products turned up with the wrong cables and various other things, because I hadn't relied on my technical resource at the time because I thought I could do it myself. So it was a expensive lesson to learn. So I think as you move through, you need to kind of let go as well of maybe what you thought you knew in the past, because things change as well. And then you need to rely on others to bring that knowledge to bear.
Absolutely. And I think what strikes me as well is, at least from what I can see as an industry, so quickly moving. And I've got there's a question I'm really keen to ask at the end, actually, which I'll almost tease a bit just now, which is your thoughts on how quickly innovation is happening and how we can keep up. And one thing as well, I guess, alongside the industry changing quickly itself, was I was really keen to get your thoughts on changing roles, and especially I noticed when you were, correct me if any of this is wrong at all, but territory leader for Scotland. And what struck me actually from doing the preparation was how many different industries you were serving. I think there was obviously IT and oil and gas and education, health, retail. How did you find the balance of, I'm going to cheat a bit and add about 5 questions in this, but yeah, how did you find the balance of serving such a diverse range of clients versus helping to run the team, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think when you're running a territory like Scotland, and it's much the same in my role at the Data Lab now, we support all industry in Scotland, from parts of the public sector, which is vast, from the NHS to local authorities to central government, all the way through energy, financial services, fintech, digital, manufacturing, retail, hospitality, tourism. There's a lot of common threads. There are some specifics, and certainly when I was at IBM, one of the benefits was occasionally we would have very detailed industry domain experts in our business partner channel. So we would rely on some of them bringing that knowledge to work in a team. Other times, and certainly at the Data Lab, a lot of the challenges are similar across industries. What we have found, though, is different industries at different points in their journey. Certainly from a data science and an AI perspective, there are some industries that are much further along that, don't want to use the kind of maturity word, but data readiness scale than maybe some other industries have got some way to go. And equally, that's a sweeping generalization. There are some manufacturing organizations which are very far to the right hand side of that, and some at the far left. I think it's, no one will ever know everything. I think it's about asking great questions. That's probably the best place to start. Ask brilliant questions and listen really hard to the answers. Great, I'm sure you've heard this. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that order. So question and listen, especially when you're trying to work with clients and in the sales space.
That's it. I love that phrase, and I think that it's incredible how often the answer comes from the client. And I think that's such a brilliant point, actually. And I wonder, conscious not to jump around too much, but touching on the changing roles you had, and quite a huge shift actually from IBM to the Data Lab. And I'd read there was a bit of a story behind it, but it'd be great to get your thoughts on your thinking behind the move. And yeah, how did you weigh up the different components of it?
Well, it's one of those really interesting things. I'd lived in London for a long time, so with IBM as well, and came home to have a family. So I've got a little girl. Some of you may have seen her on the stage with me at TED, at TEDx Glasgow. She's now just turned 10, so she was 6 at the time then. But I wanted to come home and have a family and bring her up in Scotland. And I moved back and just into a different role with IBM here as territory manager. But they kept asking me to go back to London, you know, so my next role would have needed to be a much bigger territory. It would, I think, for the next promotion, it would have been having to run $1 billion business, and Scotland at the time was about 500 million. So it was a compromise that I was very conscious that I was making. I didn't want to get on a plane on a Monday and back on a Friday, or move everyone back down to London. So I wasn't particularly looking for anything else. You know, I was great friends actually with all of the other Scotland territory leaders, and Cisco and Dell and EMC and HP and Oracle at the time. And we all had similar challenges in terms of if we wanted to live and work in Scotland. We all laughed it was called the tartan ceiling, not the glass ceiling. Because to work for those big vendors in Scotland selling into the territory, it was just a certain size and shape, and we all came to grips with that. Or you got on that commuter flight on a Monday morning and coming home on a Thursday or Friday. And I was approached, I remember the email coming in from the headhunter about the data lab. It was Christmas Eve 2014, and Christmas, December is IBM's year end, so I just filed it away. I didn't even have time to read it. And we're closing deals right up to kind of midnight on Hogmanay, and I certainly don't miss that. I've loved having my Christmas and New Year's back since I left IBM, because for 20 years I worked right through them. And come early January, I'd kind of looked at the role. It was this kind of innovation centre, startup-y thing to help the country in data, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know anything really about startups. I'm 22 years, big corporate career. I think they've sent it to the wrong person. And looked through the job description and all of the kind of attributes they were looking for, and I maybe ticked about half the boxes. And I actually wrote an email of thanks, but no thanks, I think you've got the wrong person. For some reason, I saved it in drafts. And then something happened in IBM, and my whole plan for the year set up, and there was some new edict from Armonk, which was IBM HQ at the time, that they were switching everything around, and I would have to rip up all our plans for the year and reshape the team, redivert the resources. And I'm saying, well, it just won't work. You know, Scotland's a certain size and shape, and we've talked about the breadth of industries, and they were saying, no, you know, you can only have people covering X amount of clients. And thinking, well, that just won't work. And it made me pick up the phone to the recruiter and just to explain this a little bit. And it was a Friday afternoon, and I was on the phone, and she asked about what I was doing. I said, look, I don't think I'm right for this. You know, you're building this team from scratch. It's doing something I haven't done. And the more we talked, she frankly refused to get off the phone on a Friday afternoon unless I agreed to apply. So I'm sitting here on a Friday afternoon trying to get off the phone to go on with my evening. And she says, I'm not letting you go until you commit to apply by the Monday lunchtime. So eventually I agreed that I would, which meant I had to write my first CV in 22 years over the weekend, because I hadn't never written one. I just either moved jobs or asked to move, and it happened. And I got a couple of my trusted friends in my network to review the CV through a few iterations over the week, and applied on the Monday. And then I started to read a little bit more and talk to people about, well, what is this innovation centre thing and what's it supposed to do? But the more I got to understand its purpose, its mission, the more hooked I became on, actually, you know what, I think I would love to do this. And at the time I was thinking about my daughter who was 4, and I was thinking, I've had some amazing opportunities, and if we don't get this data thing right in Scotland, if we don't create jobs and opportunity and new companies and she's not going to have the fantastic opportunities I have. And therefore, maybe it's time for me to move into a role where it's about a mission for the country, creating jobs, creating opportunity, and hopefully creating a future for her and her friends and her peers. And as I say, by the time I went for the final interview, I was really desperate for the job and was lucky enough to be offered it. And as they say, the rest is history.
Fantastic. And I think what's really powerful actually about hearing you speak about it is the purpose behind it. And I think it's just so clear and so impressive actually, and quite a huge task. Hearing you speak about Scotland as a whole and where the direction we're heading in with data especially. And it's funny actually because the next question actually is going to be all about the challenges of making that move and being in more of a startup environment. It's interesting actually to hear you speak about the difference between IBM and Christmas and maybe working longer. But coming back to that move, was there anything particularly difficult you maybe weren't expecting? Were any big challenges at the start?
I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges was telling my mother I had resigned from this wonderful 22-year career with a big fat pension to join this thing called the Data Lab. But she's like, I don't even understand who they are. I said, they don't exist yet. Well, see, how can I tell anyone who you work for and they don't even exist yet? And I said, but Mum, you don't even know what I do for IBM. She said, yeah, but they know the letters. I said, well, yeah, and they think I fix printers for a living. So that was, as a middle-aged woman telling your 70-odd-year-old mother, and then having to try and explain data science was the next challenge. And you might remember there was a program at the time on, I think it was Channel 4 or Channel 5, called Person of Interest. And basically the premise of the story was they built this big supercomputer that could, by analysing all emails, it was Big Brother, emails, photos, text, phone calls, they could predict when there was going to be a murder. And then they would try and intervene to stop the murder. So I said, well, it's a bit like that, Mum. It's like putting different bits of data together and you can see a picture that maybe you couldn't see before. And she said, so you're going to become a spy? And I was like, no, I'm not going to become a spy. And that was when I gave up trying to explain data science to my 70-year-old mother. So the challenges were some of that transition and getting your head round, you know, I've got big commitments here. I'm in a really safe, comfortable seat, and I'm going to go and do this thing that was a 4-year contract. It was in a completely different sphere, and coming over and doing it. I'll be honest, I mentioned about Christmas and New Year, but coming over to the Data Lab, and I've told my previous VPs at IBM, I've never worked so hard in IBM as I've worked in the Data Lab. But it's a different kind of work, and it's a massively passionate, you bounce out in the morning thinking, actually what we are trying to do every single day is about helping others. And it was interesting to hear your values at the start about Startup Grind. And that's what's made it so much fun.
Fantastic. No, and thank you for that. It's great to hear that the helping, value and purpose is well renowned. And almost brought on to a different question actually. I wonder, speaking of Scotland and improving where we are as a country, to me is quite focusing on abundance and positive sum. Be interesting to get your thoughts on how, as an ecosystem, how supportive are we, and is there anything we can actually do better? And this could be with startups and maybe the larger companies. What's your thoughts on that, having come from IBM and also having the startup perspective?
So I think overwhelmingly, I think Scotland's a really collaborative place to do things. You will have seen it in Startup Grind, but right across the board, generally people are willing to help. The amount of introductions that I've made or we've made, could you chat to so-and-so? I think you're a bit ahead in your journey than they are. Overwhelmingly, the answer is always yes. And I think that's quite unique, and I get asked a lot on when I go on my travels, and particularly, even the Department of Business, Energy and Innovation in London and Westminster have said, could the data lab work elsewhere? And I said, well, it could, but one of the reasons we think it works in Scotland, there's a couple of reasons. One is our size. You can kind of get your arms around it. You're probably never more than 2 steps, at most, and possibly only 1 step, whether that's from a minister, a policymaker, an investor, a VC, a client, a partner, a supplier, and somebody in your network will likely be able to make that connection. So I think our size, if we use it properly, can be a big advantage. Now, clearly, we will never invest in data and AI the way some of the larger countries are doing, the US, China, even at a UK level. But that advantage of size and connectivity. And then the second thing is our attitude to collaboration and that helpfulness. I am not sure that exists everywhere to the same degree or level. And therefore, I think, using those 2 things to our advantage, I think, can be really, really powerful for us.
Absolutely, I agree, and I think that it's always a token of the size and making the best use of it. And it's great to hear your thoughts on it. And brings us nicely on to funding. Actually, I was keen to get your ethos on funding. And if I'm correct to say, and hope this is right, when you first joined the data lab, you were the 3rd employee.
I was, yes.
And you mentioned the developing a business plan for funding, and it'd be great to get your thoughts on funding, if there's any best practices, and of course there's different funding opportunities. And to almost sneak a second question in, is there anything to avoid with funding that you see often?
So I'll probably come at that from a slightly different, because we are part of the Innovation Centre programme. The majority of our funding comes from the public sector, so it's a slightly different angle than obviously startups looking either for angel funds or other funds, grants, loans, VC through very serious rounds for funding. And when I joined, we already had the commitment of 5 years of funding, but we were about a year into it, just getting it off the ground. So, but we have had to go through a subsequent funding round with all of the stakeholders, which includes Scottish Government, Scottish Funding Council, Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and certainly going through that was a challenge of patience and will and determination. And because we're not a commercial entity, we're not there for profit. We're there for the mission of the country. But we do help a lot of companies secure funding in terms of going to Innovate UK for smart grants or other awards. And we actually have a new service where we can help companies navigate that landscape, whether it's DASA competitions, EIT Digital, Innovate UK, research councils. And that is one route to get funding. It's a tough path, and if you can get some help to get and navigate through that landscape, it's a little bit easier. I know public sector does make it pretty challenging, and it's often lengthy, and probably the one thing a lot of startups don't have is time and resource. So they don't have a lot of time to go to Scottish Enterprise 5 times trying to get an application right for an award or a grant. And I think I've seen both in friends and in my IBM career, working with our partners who often were startups or part of our ISV chain, and independent software vendors who were building software that may have leveraged IBM technology in the back end, build businesses, and then right through to the data lab. And as I've seen lots of different ways of doing it, whether it's bootstrapping and taking a little bit longer and personal investment, right through the full angel to VC, PE, and other funding routes. I think fundamentally you've got to do what's right for your business and what will help it. So there is no blanket answer that one way is better than the other. for one company, bootstrapping might be, and personal investment, and just taking the time to grow the business. But for others, actually, they need investment in to be able to build the business. All I would say is when you're taking external investment, please do your homework, and take a lot of advice through the Startup Grind Network and all the other networks that exist here. There's some great podcasts out there from people like Leslie Eccles at FanDuel, and the journey they went through and the challenges they found in selecting the right investors for their business. So I would, from the outside, because it's not something I've done, taking external investment, there's a certain way to ask the right questions about what's right for you. And if I'm sure there's some people on this call, I can see Craig there, Craig Mackay. There are people on this call with more experience than me in some of those spaces.
That's it. No, thank you for that, Jane. It's like you said, it's such a broad space, and it's great to get your thoughts from a public perspective, and it's always a fascinating and relevant topic. And one area I was keen to come back to, and I know we're speaking about maybe more of a positive outlook with lockdown being lifted and return to almost reality in some areas. One thing that struck me, and I remember seeing this at the time, I believe it was mid to end March, I actually remember seeing your posts about the Data Fest, and of course with all events being cancelled, and genuinely at the time what struck me was the almost sense of calm and the sense of everything just happening smoothly and making important difficult decisions. I was really keen to ask you actually about the last few months given lockdown and COVID, and to almost cheat again and ask a couple of questions in one. I was keen to get your thoughts on any leadership principles that have been especially helpful, and if there's anything you learned from the past 4 months or so that has really stood out.
Oh, lots, learned lots. I've learned that I'm an absolute rubbish teacher. I don't know if there's any other parents in the call. I absolutely suck at that. And I know what my next career move won't be, and that's into teaching. So that's one thing I've definitely learned about myself. I've also learned I hate sitting still. So being almost chained to this screen and desk for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. I now know why I like doing what I do in terms of moving around all the time. But going back to cancelling DataFest it seemed a really big decision at the time. And in hindsight, it just pales into insignificance now. But at the time we made it, so thinking back, DataFest, as many of you may know, you may have been participating in it. It's been something we've built over the last 3 or 4 years. It's a big festival of data innovation. This year was due to be our biggest. We were expecting around 100 events over the course of the 2 weeks, 6,000 participants. We had Tim Peake, the astronaut, coming to speak to 1,000 school kids and to our Data Summit audience. We had Hannah Fry, who's ended up on the telly loads since. She was coming up again for DataFest. So we had a real stellar programme from Orkney to Dumfries over the 2 weeks. And obviously, as we started to get towards those final planning days in end of February, Italy was starting to see, Northern Italy was particularly badly hit with COVID, and you're thinking, is the UK next, and what's the impact in Scotland? And we, from late February, we then started to have twice daily COVID risk management calls. And as we moved into early March, do we cancel it all before it starts? And we were in regular contact with the government around what government advice was coming down the line, and could we get early sight of that so that we could make better decisions. We had speakers and attendees flying in from all over the world. We had sponsors large corporate sponsors who were starting to tighten up their travel in early March. And we were kind of weighing up all the risks, the reputational risks of putting on an event, and then having to, call all your attendees 2 weeks later and say, actually, There's people there with COVID. So we did launch on the 9th. And the reason we did go ahead with actually the start of it was all of those events were kind of sub 50 people. The big events were in the second week, where we had kind of 500 plus at some of the events. And the week of the 9th of March, things started to escalate quite quickly. We started to get nervousness from our sponsors. We started to see some of the speakers that were coming over for them in the US the following week saying, my flight's been cancelled, I've got another one, not quite sure what's going to happen. And by the Wednesday, there was almost no decision to be made. So by Wednesday, the 11th of March, which was still 2 weeks before UK lockdown, we said, no, it is not reputationally right to go ahead and we will take the losses. Within 24 hours, everyone had their money back. We returned all the sponsor monies. We've taken a big financial hit, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. Sitting, months later when the night conference, I don't know if you caught up on some of the daily press releases about the night conference that was late February in Edinburgh, and the original COVID cases potentially came from there. You start to think, actually, my goodness, thank goodness we did make that decision, because it would have been awful to feel we had put anyone at risk by continuing. So sometimes those decisions need to be made, and you accept the consequences of that, but it was absolutely right. We just did not want to risk anyone's health and well-being, and obviously we know more now than we did then, but the consequences of people taking potentially this home to their families and their loved ones was not a risk we were willing to take. In terms of since then, you've probably heard a lot of it before, over-communicate, balance. We're actually using as much audio now as video. At the start, it was all video. We asked people, turn on your camera. As we've moved forward, actually, if an audio call will do, just do that. Go for a walk in your garden, put your washing on. Being really flexible around working hours and other commitments, being really sensitive that every situation is individual. Over the past few months, you cannot group people together. So you can't say, well, all our families and parents will want this, or it just doesn't work like that. If you've got a 2-year-old versus a 16-year-old, the needs are very different. If you've got a partner at home that is also trying to work from home, if you've got family or friends who have COVID, you might have it. If you're worried about loved ones losing their jobs and their livelihood, if you're worried about an elderly parent or a relative or your family network shielding, every situation, every person's situation is different. If you're living on your own, if you're flat sharing, all those things, we've had to explore conversations with our teammates that maybe we would never have done under normal circumstance. And again, it's all about listening and understanding and trying to be as flexible as you can be. And we've done a reorg, we've onboarded people, we've recruited people during lockdown. We've pivoted our Innovation Week to digitally delivered, 155 master's students working on a circular economy challenge. So there's almost nothing that we've not been able to do without some thinking. Very conscious of people overworking and not leaving their desk and saying, I'll just get another little bit done. Pushing hard now on people taking some time off and holidays. So I'm just back from 2 weeks off. Didn't go anywhere, but had a break from the screen. So really conscious of that. And I would say we're still learning. And I'm sure some of you on the call tonight will tell me things that would really help me and the team at the Data Lab.
Fantastic. And what strikes me is just how much has changed in 4 months. And what's brilliant, actually, it's great to hear actually how you prioritize the well-being factors. I think that during a pandemic, almost everything seems to go out the window, and it's just truly, I keep trying to avoid cliches. I do apologize. Unprecedented time, and a few shaking heads. But one thing I was keen to ask you later on actually was about the rest and getting holidays and self-care. And I suppose actually, even more specifically, tough and potentially stressful periods. Do you have any go-to strategies during a particularly busy time, or is there anything you've actually used during lockdown that's been quite helpful?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I have a really tight group of friends and trusted network. You know, either people that I've worked with in the past. I don't have a huge friends network, but it's quite small, and I rely on them often, and they'll always tell me the truth. They will tell me when I'm maybe behaving in a way that's not right or not true to me. My husband's quite good at that as well, but he probably does that more often than he needs to tell me when I'm not behaving myself. And my daughter keeps my feet on the ground, and my family do. I'm from just outside Glasgow, working class, first in the family to go to uni. My mum was a cleaner, my dad was a welder. My sister's a nurse in A&E, so she's been really on the front line. Her partner's a paramedic, so they make sure my feet's on the ground, and they bring home the reality of actually what might be a bad day for me really probably isn't that bad.
So, yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? It all puts absolutely everything into perspective. And one thing I'd heard actually about the space and astronaut side of things was, I think this was a quote, and I may just be completely making this up, but about how as soon as you go into space and you get a view of the Earth, you just really appreciate that actually some of the big problems and situations are actually sometimes smaller than you realize. Conscious of time, I've got pages of potential questions. We're getting some great questions on Slido, so I'll give you guys a chance to get some more in. I was really keen, Joan, to come back actually, and I really enjoyed listening to your TED Talk as part of the preparation. I think it's back 2017. Really keen to ask you your thoughts on 2037 and if any of your predictions or thinking has changed. And this could be the last 3 years in general, and I suppose COVID's a slightly bigger spanner in the works than was expected. Has anything changed since then?
I guess, you know, going back to the talk and kind of living a day in the life of Charlie in 2037, it was more around provocation. You know, all of the pretty much all of the things were in the technology advancements and innovations were in test or in R&D. In fact, in some cases in production somewhere in the world. But it had never been pulled together into that narrative of a day and what it would mean. Now, some of those technologies will arrive much, much sooner than 2037. Some may never quite arrive, whether that's the augmented reality contact lenses or there's a lot of debate around when fully autonomous vehicles will be everywhere. When you will have your AI assistant that will know everything about you and help you, and your data will be your own to do what you like with, and control who has access to it and who doesn't. When you start to think of that, you think, well, actually, there's maybe some barriers in the way of that type of thing happening, but all of the technology is possible. That's what was interesting, and I think it'll be down to us as humans and as society as to our willingness to accept and adopt and embrace those or not. What it didn't focus on was around the whole view of the economy and capitalism to a certain extent. And one of the things I think in the last 4 months is that sense of community, and also the huge spotlight is put on inequalities and the fact that actually we really, really don't have an inclusive society at all. This is not just Scotland, this is pretty much the kind of Western world economies. And actually that spotlight, it makes you, I don't think it makes us very proud of where we're at right now, and it puts that view on actually we've got a long way to go to really have a truly inclusive society. when you look at the use of the food banks and the people who really have had nothing over the last 4 months. It's really, really challenging. When I do look at my daughter's Google Classroom, it's the same 10, 12 children from the class that's posting. And there's children in her class that have not posted anything in 4 months. And that may well be, it may be because they don't have a device in the house. They have not, they just don't have any access. You've had schools delivering packed lunches and it's the only meal that some children are having. So I think technology advancement is fantastic, and innovation, and certainly when we get into the kind of data and AI questions. But we've really got to be quite critical of ourselves and our goals as a country, an economy and society as to how do we want to use these technical innovations to just drive shareholder value and technological advancement and capitalism, or do we want to use it in a more balanced way to create a more inclusive society? And maybe we've got a chance of doing that after COVID, or we may have to live with COVID for many years to come.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a brilliant point, and I was really keen actually to get your thoughts on, because it's such a huge issue, and at least from what I can see, there's so many complexities that we often don't realize. I appreciate it's probably a really difficult question, but right now, and potentially specifically to Scotland, if it's possible, what can we do to almost start chipping away and having a positive impact and really moving towards a more equal society? Is there anything? I appreciate it's such a big complex matter.
I think there are some things that, I don't know if the Scottish Tech Army is doing a lot of amazing volunteer work now. The kind of digital experts and technology experts volunteering their time to help. I think the goal around the national performance framework, and which are quite closely aligned to so these are Scottish national performance frameworks. They're quite closely aligned to the UN sustainability SDGs development goals. And we're helping, should we say, facilitate some of the work around the AI strategy for Scotland. And at its heart, it's about putting the citizen at the heart of our AI strategy. And it was really interesting in the initial discussions at the steering group on that. And we had organisations representing businesses and SMEs, and we had trade union, and we had the education sector and things. It was like, well, don't forget the economy, and well, don't forget all the research. And at the end of the day, if we get it right for our citizens, then actually all the other things should fall into place. Our skills programs, our research programs, our economic opportunity, or use of AI in the public sector. Because if we do get it right for every citizen, all of those things will have had to happen. Whereas we might get AI right for our economy, but it might leave a whole swathe of people behind. So it's just been an interesting dynamic looking at it from that perspective. But if we get it right for our citizen, we need a healthy economy. We need a robust education system. We need progressive and advanced public sector services. So I think there are great foundations and some real green shoots, but I'm not sure any economy in the world's got this right yet. It's going to be really interesting to see how we come through this period and into the next, what's going to be a very tough few months and years, how we do that, and how then we use technology and innovation to help us do that.
Absolutely, and fingers crossed. It's such a huge topic, and I really do hope that we are moving in that direction. And final question for me, and keen to focus on the positive of the last few months. I know we mentioned a few, and the sense of community being absolutely up there. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what for you has been the biggest positive, at least from what you've seen during the last 4 months?
Um, I'd mentioned a little bit of the early community, people pulling together, not asking who's going to pay for it. The public sector innovation, I didn't in my career, but I certainly I've known people who've been trying to sell video conferencing to the NHS for many years, and were told all these reasons why a GP couldn't have a video consultation with a patient. And guess what? They did it in 2 weeks. For all those, FE and higher education, oh no, we can't do lectures remotely, or we can't support students remotely. They did it in 2 weeks. If you start to look at the blockers that just disappeared, and they're just two examples, and that there are hundreds. The blockers that disappeared to enable things to happen. I think let's not lose that, and let's not lose the community sense as well. And I think from a personal perspective, that regrounding with family, I travel a little bit, but I don't travel anywhere near as many of the people in my network who do get on that plane on a Monday and back on a Friday, or are all over the world, and actually spending time with family and regrounding and what's really, really important and what makes you happy.
That's it. It's a brilliant point to end on, at least from my questions, and thank you for that, Gillian. It was just brilliant to get your perspective on so many topics. I could genuinely ask so many more questions from my side, but to be selfless and let you guys have the opportunity to get involved, I'll pass over to Alan. I believe we've got some really good questions from Slido, Alan, and I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Declan. And thanks you, Gillian. Great interview, great insights. I've got some questions myself, but before I ask my question, there are some questions from the audience. Since we have the names for those questions, we'll bring the people in. One of them is Duncan. So I'm just going to unmute Duncan, and he's going to ask the question himself. Duncan, are you there?
Thanks. Hi there. Thanks, Alan. Hi, Gillian. I guess I was just interested to hear what you thought, or what you hope to see Scotland's capabilities in data science in, say, 10, even maybe 20 years' time. Do you really see us as being world leaders in this space? Is that something that we can aspire to, or what's your kind of vision there in terms of building our capability in data science?
Yeah. I absolutely have the aspiration that we will be. Now, we won't be world leader in everything to everybody. That just frankly isn't possible, again, back to that size. But therefore, there are things we can do because of our size, because we can be more connected. Can we make our public sector, our public services, the most data-driven in the world? Well, there's no reason why not. We've seen countries like Estonia, be heralded as great examples around digital citizen, digital participation. So there's no reason why Scotland can't lead in terms of, well, actually, have you seen what Scotland's doing with data and AI for their country, for their citizens, for their people? So I don't think it will be all things to because we just don't have the scale, the resources, nor the cash. If you start to look at what US and China and even some, European level are investing, I think it'd be great to actually have an aspiration that we're the most data literate country in the world, from our school children to our grandparents. We understand the concepts around data, to all varying degrees, obviously, but we're the most data literate. It's not just about reading literacy and numeracy, we're data literate. And then we have a fantastic breadth of our companies are data active almost. They're using their data in innovative ways. That might not mean that they're using the latest AI algorithm. It might mean that they have extensive use of BI to run whatever. So it's all about the right levels. It's not all about everyone being right at the cutting edge of research and adoption of research. But we've got really great foundations in terms of our education system, our universities, our companies. Our tech ecosystem now is better than it's ever been. And so those foundational, we've got a government who believes in it and are investing in it. So the great foundation, the building blocks are there. So I see no reason why we cannot aspire to be world leaders, but to know what we're aiming for and in what space and how we're going to get there, and then get everyone behind that as a mission and a goal. Because without that, you know, everyone disappears in their kind of own paths. And certainly when I'm out talking to companies and looking and chatting to foreign direct investment organisations that are looking to come and build and set up in Scotland, they can see something different here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, just if you don't mind, a follow-up question, do you think government needs to lead on that then? Because as you say, that suggests to me that we need to focus on something. How do we bring everyone together to focus on those achievable goals if we do need to focus on things?
I don't think it's the government's job to lead and do it all. I think it's their role to facilitate and get out the way when they need to.
Mm-hmm.
But actually the onus is on us all to set that vision and to create that roadmap and pathway, and then ask government for help. I think a lot of the time, and I'm not just talking about data or AI, it's easy to sit back and say, well, the government should be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But well, are they really best to set that vision? Or are they best to support it, to facilitate it, to potentially invest in it, and to set the frameworks, as it were, or the boundaries or the support networks that are needed to make it happen? Because actually they can't make 1 million startups. Yeah. I'm not saying that's what we need, but we need great companies, we need great scale-ups, we need our fisheries and our aquaculture and our haulage companies to do more with their data. We need our manufacturers to become we need an integrated, a better supply chain. That became very apparent at the start of COVID around PPE and others. So I don't think it's their job to do it, but I think it's all of our jobs to set that vision. And then organisations like the Data Lab have to take a role in setting that way and then supporting. But I think they do have a role in terms of facilitating and sometimes, getting out the way when they need to.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We are about to head to Johnny. Johnny, are you there?
I'm here, Alan.
Okay, go for it.
All right, yeah, thanks very much, Gillian. Thanks very much for coming in and chatting to us. And I love the parts you've mentioned, something semi-unique to Scotland is the whole community aspect. The want to help because we want to see our nation do better. On that kind of note, feel free, anyone in this chat, reach out to Dec over in Edinburgh area. I'm around in Glasgow, and I'm sure Gillian as well, if you're open to it. How can we help? Let's provide a helping hand where we can. My question is in line with how we as the general public view data and use data at the moment, willingly giving it away to various companies. Is there something you see the majority of the population doing that we think perhaps with your knowledge we probably shouldn't be doing or should have more ownership over? I would love to hear your thoughts in this space.
Well, it's a really interesting question, Johnny. I'm sure you'll all be aware of the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal 2 years ago. We had Christopher Wiley at DataFest last year, who was the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. So I interviewed him and spoke to him for about 2 hours. And it was just fascinating what went on there. And suddenly I was really popular at parties because people are like, do you know about this Facebook thing? What are they doing with our data? And having to explain, what was going on. And that whole view that, well, if the product's free, then you are the product. Your data's the product. Now, I think one of the benefits of that scandal was, as awful as it was, and I'm sure we still probably don't even know the half of it, is that people were starting to ask more questions. And that leads to more discussion and more knowledge. And it's back to that whole, why shouldn't we have the ambition to be the most data literate country in the world? To ask those questions, well, what exactly are you doing with it? How's it been used? but equally, I think saying, you know, everything should be banned, Google, Amazon, Facebook, all the big, I can't remember the acronym, Gopher or whatever it's called, because I think, yeah, it's something like that, because I think there's elements of a value exchange, and I don't think it's right for us to set our value exchange thresholds on others. Other people will have a different value exchange, that actually I will give you this and you will provide for me a product that I'm happy with and is giving me value. But that needs to be a transparent value equation, and that's what it's not been. It's not been a transparent and an open value equation discussion. So I give Facebook my data, and they do what with it, you know. Is that a transparent view? And GDPR has certainly, you know, the intention of GDPR is to move towards that. But again, probably the average member of the public wouldn't know what is GDPR. Oh, that's now all those blinking boxes I need to tick, and those 5 million emails I got when it came in. You know, why do we need that? So again, it's proportionality is probably a really important word there, because actually that probably turned off lots of people. And well, I don't, you know, why do we even need this? And suddenly I've got all these people asking if they can contact me. But I think that value exchange is really interesting. What's happening in the data space, though, is a big move towards kind of personal data stores. And I'd mentioned it in the TED talk, but so Tim Berners-Lee's got behind this thing called SolidPod, and there are a few others. You know, there's a community interest company called MyDex. They have a big presence in Scotland as well, where this the idea is you have your own personal data store, and then you grant access to elements of that to a supplier for that value exchange. So if you wanted to switch from EE to Vodafone, then you would give them just sufficient access to the minimum amount of data they need about you to do that service transition. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in that space going forward, because there's a level of movement towards that, and to data trusts as well. So ODI and Open Knowledge Foundation and various others are making there's a lot of discussions around data trusts and these kind of personal data stores, and how that could change how we do data transactions with companies and organisations, and even parts of the public sector. So MyDex do quite a bit in some of the public sector local authorities.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I've written them down. We'll have a little look once we're done here.
Right, we got some late entry questions here as well. I'm going to try to get Cashin. I don't know if he's available. Let's try and unmute. There we go. Yes.
That's my question. I need to just bring it up actually just now. Okay, so mine was more orientated towards SMEs and startups in that sense. My mum actually has a small cafe, and we've been trying to adapt online, doing a lot more marketing, and obviously a lot more small businesses are going to have to do that. But one of the things that's new to especially people that are maybe of an older generation, and to some young people as well, how do we educate and provide the skills to small businesses and startups in Scotland looking to unlock untapped value, and that's both in commercial and the societal sense?
Are you particularly looking at data, Keshan, or more broadly digital, e-commerce, social media skills?
We're a small business, so at the moment it's relating to small business and digital media skills. But I'm actually undertaking in September the one of the data labs, which is funding, which I've applied for the scholarship for one of the conversion master programs at Strathclyde. Yep. With the idea of being able to find some sort of way to help small businesses at scale unlock that potential, but not necessarily just strictly within that digital social media sense, as probably everyone's used to hearing.
Mm-hmm. So I think probably a couple of things. One is at the Data Lab, we've got a fantastic online course which is free called Driving Value from Data, and it's geared towards both commercial, charity, third sector, and it's so you can get access to that via our website. It's on the Future Learn platform, and we've probably funded another 12 online learning courses around the application of data in certain industry sectors that are relevant for Scotland. So gaming analytics, environmental modelling. Not sure we've got a one for small cafe owners, but there's content like that. I think there's a huge amount of online stuff, and even more so in the last 4 months. I think I've seen more online content for training than I've ever seen. For small businesses, I've certainly seen quite a lot of capability and support coming through the chambers of commerces, who both are running face-to-face. Well, they used to run face-to-face. They're doing a lot more digital and online support for e-commerce, and they're pulling in organisations like Made Brave. I don't know if you're aware of them in Glasgow, who are a really progressive digital agency. So Andrew Dobie's done a whole pile of things with the Chamber, Glasgow Chamber, for example, and others. So I think there is content out there, and most of it is free or very cost effective to access. And it's really about probably the challenge is about finding the right thing, the right level, that's suitable for whatever the organisation is and however progressed they are or where they're going in their journey. But good luck on your masters. We're really proud of that programme.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and like I said, I've applied for the scholarship, so hopefully that'll work out well. But just to finish up on that point as well, because I'm actually doing a lot of courses just now on things like Coursera, edX and things like that, and a variety of things, and I will check out that one from the Data Labs. But just on a final point, obviously for someone like myself who's got the time in some sense to do it versus small business owners who are too busy right now. For example, my mum the other day had to lay off 20 staff and is dealing with refinancing and landlords and so on and so forth. So I think that's also the challenge of getting people, and obviously the Scottish Tech Army is involved as well, but one of the biggest challenges is getting through to people that aren't used to that, and also giving them up front there's some knowledge there and that they should go and access that. That's something that I'm even having trouble with, coming directly communicating with my own mum and my family, from that point of view. It's actually quite challenging.
I think it is, and it's really sad to hear about your mum, and it's a horrible situation. I'm sure she's found herself in to have to do that with the business and our staff. And I think when you're in that type of crisis mode, I'm not sure any of these online courses are probably at your forefront in mind in terms of investing your time and skills. So it is a challenge, and I think what's going to be really important is for those 20 individuals is how do we support them? Is there ways they can upskill or retrain or get access to some of this content that will allow them to develop new skills that might pivot them into a different role. It's a huge chat. There's a whole pile of research and reports going on just now around talent and the impact on skills and obviously jobs.
That's great, thanks.
Awesome. So for the last question, we head into Nick. Let me quickly unmute him. There you go, Nick. You're ready to go.
Perfect. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Gillian, for that. That was all really, really interesting. My question's sort of further to Duncan's, because we were mentioning, of course, Scotland being, sort of such strong potential as a leader in data science because of its size and because of the importance of its openness to collaboration. So on the basis of that, do you view there being any particular challenges to international data collaboration, just on the basis that with data, presumably the more data, the better. So if you were looking to collaborate internationally, are there any particular challenges to that?
I think there's a whole raft of challenges depending on what industry you're in, from regulation to ethics to, I guess, privacy. So probably those three are the key areas. If you look at health data doesn't leave the country. Yeah, So we've worked on projects looking at things like federated health data. So, and it's really interesting when you start to look at precision medicine and stratified medicine and the complexities now of growing older and having comorbidities. So you have multiple things wrong with you because you're older and you have lots more things. So when you're looking at treatment pathways and drug development, sometimes the data, the size of the cohort is so small that it becomes statistically irrelevant. So if you're looking at, 70 plus females with heart and breast cancer and dementia, you're talking about a much smaller cohort in one country. So the whole concept behind federated healthcare data was, can you build tools to distribute the analysis that gets then run in the country? So the data never leaves the country. But if you then have 7 jurisdictions, so you have UK and Italy and Spain and Canada and Belgium, all in the federated health structure, none of the health data leaves the country, but the analysis goes and runs in the country, and then the results are aggregated back. So there are ways to be innovative without having to completely open our data borders, as it were. But that's a very specific ask. When you look at financial services and other regulated industries, there's some really tight regulation on what is and what is not possible with data, and GDPR comes into that, but also the regulation in certain areas. And then at a much broader international level, you start to get into privacy and security, and I'm certainly not going to get into the Huawei discussions and whether they should or should not be part of the UK's 5G network, because I think there's plenty of opinions going around that. So are there challenges? Absolutely, across all of those spectrums, but there are ways in which you can create international data collaborations, but you need to be sensitive to them, you need to understand them, and you need to see actually, well, why do you want to do it? What's the value? And therefore, again, it's back to that almost that value equation, and what's the right thing to do. I'm certainly one that, and when I talk about this, you may have heard me use this phrase before, just because you can doesn't mean you should when it comes to data science and AI. And you need to ask those questions. I think part of that's having diverse teams, having diversity of thought and asking the questions, being really open to understanding and self-critical on data sets, data sources, bias, including, ethics is a fundamental all of the way through that, as well as obviously knowing the law and regulation, which we also need to comply with.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Fantastic.
All right.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Alan, for being my Q&A MC. Really appreciate it, and great to have everyone's questions, and thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Gillian, for making the time. I can only imagine how much you have on, and especially after a couple of weeks off. Hope you're feeling well rested and ready to tackle the next challenges.
Yeah, no, it was a real pleasure. It was great, and thank you for questions. Hopefully, my answers have been somewhat useful. And good luck on all your journeys. And honestly, if the Data Lab can help in any way, just let us know.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you, Gillian, and thank you, everyone. And quick question, Alan and everyone, if you guys are up for it, should we do a boomerang or not? What do you think?
Let me get to the gallery view. I think if people can switch on their cameras, we've got Emma and Keshan, if you can. And you can grab something random in your hand. Because we're recording, so I'm going to use this as a boomerang and make like a screenshot for us as well. Maybe you can grab something random. I'm going to enjoy this afterwards.
Me too, actually.
That looks like a unicorn there.
It is. My daughter was in visiting my office before the call, and she left this.
Awesome.
Just in case I needed it for the call.
Excellent. We got it.
Amazing. Fantastic. And And thank you again, everyone, and really appreciate you all making the time. It's great to all come together virtually. Super quickly, I know you guys need to head off. Time permission. Johnny, if you're able to unmute, do you want to super quickly let everyone know what's happening next week?
Absolutely. I can let you know, but I think this is prime time to let our man Alan pitch this one. All right. If you want to give it a shot.
Yeah, I'll take over. So I've joined Startup Grand about a year ago, and this is going to be next week is going to be the first time I'm going to host the event for the first time. It's a very special one to me. It's going to be about creating and building a business community whilst traveling with my good friend Johannes Faulkner, which I met in Brazil. And he created this amazing community and an event for startup owners and entrepreneurs called Nomad Cruise. It's a retreat. It's a mastermind. It's an event that happens on a cruise ship from Europe to Brazil and a few other destinations. He's been traveling around the world, being a digital nomad, building remote businesses, interacting with hundreds or even thousands of people who do the same. And he will tell his story. We'll be talking about trying to do this in other professions, ourselves, including myself. I'm trying to get there where we have enough freedom, and now digitally, there's a lot of more people having this opportunity. We will be able to travel and work wherever we are. So that's what we're going to be talking about. It's a week from now on Wednesday, 22nd. I think it's going to be pretty awesome. I'm going to include some other digital nomads as well in the audience. So they'll share their experience, their stories, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun listening to that.
Fantastic. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And thank you again, everyone. I'll let everyone pop off and have a drink potentially or to the rest of your evenings. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure I'll see you guys soon, hopefully in person, but if not, virtually. So thanks again, guys, and we'll see you soon.